You know about Spain, you know about the Second World War, but what about Spain during the Second World War? Because did you know Spain had a dictator? Franco was in good terms with Adolf Hitler, but Spain was neutral. However, Spain did send soldiers, volunteers, to fight on the Eastern Front in the so-called Blue Division. This here is a story of Spain during World War II.
Hey, good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Steven, I'm a Dutch history teacher and I love to make history videos both on location and at home. And if you find it interesting, consider subscribing. Also hit that notification bell. Do you know I like coffee? No? Well, I do. And you can buy me a coffee. How about that? Links are in the description. If you want to understand Spain in World War II and the choices that were made during the Second World War, we need to understand one conflict that took place before the Second World War. A conflict that was called the Spanish Civil War that took place in the latter half of the 1930s, from 1936 till 1939, where the left and the right clashed. It started with a nationalist coup that overthrew the unstable Second Spanish Republic. This republic was led by the Popular Front, which was a loose cooperation of moderate left-wing and extreme left-wing factions. Those on the right, they were called the Nationalists, those on the left, the Republicans. Now, the Republicans were not that well united, as was proven in May 1937, known as the May Days, where different factions within the Republican side clashed. The Nationalists were led by Army General Francisco Franco. He had neither the look nor the commanding voice of a dashing military leader. He was short, pudgy and balding. Unlike many, he expected the Civil War to be long, dirty and closely fought. In preparation, he solicited and received aid from Hitler and Mussolini. To the irritation of both dictators, Franco resisted pressure for bold actions that, in his judgment, would have entailed taking excessive risks. He used aerial bombardments to soften up any opposition before attacking on the ground. He paid careful attention to logistics and didn't squander his ammunition, equipment or men. Franco was a cruel man, as he personally ordered the executions of thousands of alleged enemies. He was designated as a future chief of state, as a de facto dictator, and everywhere he went, posters proclaimed un estado, un país, un jefe, one state, one country, one leader, which was an echo to the Nazi slogan of Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. Now, calling Franco a pure fascist is often disputed. For sure, he had fascist tendencies. See, with every ideology that had been put in practice, it never looked the same everywhere. When the Civil War ended, Franco vowed never to pick up the sword again unless it was for the protection of his own country. Historian Stanley G. Payne wrote about Franco's party, the Phalange, the following. All fascist-type movements were, however singular, differentiated by national characteristics, even more than was the case among communist movements. In that of the Phalange, revolutionary nationalism was mediated, often uneasily and contradictorily, by an attempted symbiosis with cultural and religious traditionalism. The new man sought by nearly all revolutionary movements, fascist or otherwise, was in the Spanish case less novel and more characterized by traditional values, a tendency that placed Phalangism on a kind of cusp between revolutionary fascism and national tradition as affirmed by the radical right. The Nationalists won the Civil War because of their more professional units, secure economy and food supply, order behind the lines and foreign backing. One of the backing legions was the Condor Legion, which consisted of German troops that fought on the side of the Nationalists during the Civil War. The Germans bombed the Spanish town of Guernica, which was later immortalized by Picasso. Now, different fascist regimes in Europe looked down on one another. The Nazis of Germany didn't see fascist Italy as revolutionary enough. Both Germany and Italy saw Franco as reactionary. And on their turn, the Spanish Phalangists, they looked down on Salazar's Portugal and the later established Vichy France. In the months after the Civil War, Spain seemed to become aligned with the Axis powers. Spain had left the League of Nations and in 1939 joined the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was an anti-communist pact that originated from 1936 between Germany and Japan. Now with this, Spain did not officially join the Axis. Spanish leaders visited both Germany and Italy. In May 1939, there were talks held in Rome. Francisco Franco's brother-in-law, Serrano Suñer, enjoyed a close relationship with Mussolini. Franco and Serrano formed a powerful duo in Spanish politics. An economic plan was approved in October 1939 and was notable for its tendency towards autarky, self-reliance. The plan failed as from 1939 till 1942 there was a famine in Spain, known as the Years of Hunger, in which over 200,000 Spaniards perished. For Franco's Spain, the German invasion of Poland and thus the outbreak of war in Europe was unwelcome news. Now, up until that time, Spain was very closely linked to Italy. Italy officially joined the war in June 1940 by invading France, which by the time was almost defeated by Germany. The Spanish authoritarian leaders, they began to make demands to the British concerning Gibraltar, which is located here in the south of Spain. It's in British hands up until today, and that was since the 18th century. Spain also came into action by enlarging Spanish Morocco by invading French-held Tangier. With France almost defeated by Germany, the Tangier international zone was taken without any resistance as 4,000 more soldiers took the territory. Franco also modified Spain's position and put it on a footing of non-belligerence instead of neutrality. With France defeated by Germany, Spain felt more and more the urge to join the Axis. And the Germans did put pressure on Spain to join the war at their side. In mid-June 1940, Franco sent General Jorge Vigon to hold talks with Hitler and expressed the willingness of Spain to join the conflict. Spain had large debts with Germany for the German aid during the Civil War. Despite this, Spain made excessive territorial demands. They wanted to extend their possessions in the Sahara and Guinea. They wanted the whole of Morocco and a part of French Algeria. And there were times that the Phalangists wanted parts of France and Portugal too. There was not a single section of the Franco regime that was not in favor of these imperialist ambitions. If for Phalangists Spain's imperial destiny seemed likely to be fulfilled by this process, for Africanists who had fought in North Africa, long-cherished ambitions would be realized. The Phalangists, nonetheless, were the most ambitious and least realistic. And these ambitions were not realistic. And Hitler was simply not interested in them. Hitler had less interest in the Mediterranean. He wanted to go east to create Lebensraum, living space for the Germans over there. And after the fall of France, a puppet government was set up named Vichy France. And they controlled from then on the colonies, and Vichy France would never allow Spain taking over parts of the French Empire. The Germans did have a plan to enter Spain though, Unternehmen Felix, and that was to seize Gibraltar from the British. Other German plans were drafted, but all abandoned. Throughout 1940 and 1941, 18 German submarines were reprovisioning in Spain, which extended their radius of action greatly. The Spanish Secret Service shared information with the Germans, and also the German Secret Service, the Abwehr, was stationed in Spain. And Spain supplied Germany with tungsten, wolfram, a material of great importance for war industries. The British were not sitting idle. For them, friendly Spain was desirable, but a neutral Spain was essential. British ambassador to Spain, Sir Samuel Hoare, used money to buy the influence of Spanish generals. He made agreement with Spain to provide the country in oil, which Spain was lacking severely, as well as other supplies. Just enough for Spain to survive the war, but not to take part in it. And if the Germans would dare to enter Spain, or if Spain would choose the side of the Axis, the British had men and material at the ready to intervene. Over the summer of 1940, Spain repeatedly presented their demands to Hitler, but Hitler was not interested in them. Hitler made his own demands. He had his own agenda. Hitler saw Spain as a weak country that was lacking resources and demanding too much. Franco wrote, "We shall benefit from being in the war, but not by acting in haste." He wanted to gain as much as possible with the least amount of intervention. Now this is interpreted differently by historians. Some claim he did not want to join the war and basically made unrealistic demands in order to be rejected and therefore stay out of it. But most evidence shows that Franco was genuinely interested in joining the war. He just performed very poor diplomatically. Himmler visited Spain and Franco and Hitler did meet in October 1940 at Hendaye train station on the Franco-Spanish border. It has been suggested that Franco avoided to commit himself while Hitler desperately tried to make him do so. What really happened was that Hitler, who always despised the Spanish leaders, managed on that occasion to get them to sign a protocol that committed Spain to entering the conflict, but on no precise date, which meant that the situation remained open. Franco himself had gone to the meeting with a memorandum in which he explained that he could not enter the war just because he wanted to, reminding Germany that Italy had become a burden to its ally. The meeting was not a success, and a few days later it seemed that Hitler said the following to Mussolini about Franco: "I prefer to have 3 or 4 of my own teeth pulled out rather than to speak to that man again." By January, Hitler considered the option of taking Gibraltar close. He already set his eyes on Greece, where the Italians were bogged down in Mussolini's overbearing attempt to conquer Greece. After that, Hitler and his forces would drive east, and the Mediterranean was of less interest to him. Besides, it would be impossible to conduct 2 military operations simultaneously at the extreme sides of Europe. By February 1941, Franco visited Mussolini in Italy. To Mussolini, he said that he was afraid that his country was joining too late. Mussolini later expressed to one of his associates that he wondered how a country without bread can even fight a war. Italy did want Spain to join the war, but only when it suited their interests. Spain also had its internal struggles. During the Civil War, the Republicans were very divided, but so were the Nationalists. Some Spanish generals wanted to join the war, but they realized it would be very hard because Spain was barely prepared. And then there was also the question of the distribution of power within Spain. Some generals hated Serrano Suñer, who served as minister and exercised great power. The Spanish military believed that they had won the civil war and saw the Falange party they had helped to put in power as demagogic and ineffectual. In May 1941, a political crisis occurred, after which some changes were made in the government. The Falange party got more power, Serrano Suñer got less power, and Franco remained in power. Spain did not fight in World War II, but Spaniards did fight in World War II. Most notably was the Blue Division, División Azul, which consisted of Spanish volunteers in German uniform that fought on the Eastern Front, most of them in the Leningrad area. Around 45,000 men had served in the German ranks as the 250th Infantry Division on the Eastern Front with its commander Agustín Muñoz Grandes. They held their ground in one of the biggest battles over there, the battle at Krasny Bor in February 1943. The Spanish Legion, which represented the elite in Spanish fighting units, cultivated valor of an almost suicidal nature, and their battle cry was "Viva la muerte," which translates rather paradoxically as "long live death." For their part, the Phalangists, like all fascist movements, had made the cult of their fallen comrades the most important part of their rituals. For them, sacrificing one's life in combat was the highest form of valor. I covered this unit in a separate video, please do see the end screen. The first Spanish battalions from the Blue Division arrived back in Spain in 1942. Their deployment officially ended in October 1943, and the last units returned home in the spring of 1944. Spain's ambitions of obtaining Gibraltar or large parts of North Africa were dashed. And with the Axis on the losing side, Spain did its best to distance itself from the Axis powers. With the Blue Division pulled off the front, over 2,000 Spaniards continued to fight in the Blue Legion till 1944, and from that moment till the end of the war, over 100 volunteers would continue to fight in the 101st SS Spanish Volunteer Company and saw action in the Battle of Berlin. It is estimated 5,000 Spaniards had been killed in action, 20,000 wounded in action, around 500 were POW'd by the Soviets. There were also many Spaniards that joined the Allies. Do notice that when war broke out, there were many Spanish who had fought on the Republican side living in France, and many of them joined the Spanish Foreign Legion. I read around 60,000 joined the French resistance, and others joined the Free French forces. When France was liberated, an Allied unit consisting of Spaniards named La Nueva was the first unit to enter Paris. Hundreds of Spaniards fought at the side of the Soviet Union, either within the ranks of the Red Army or as partisans behind the line. And when Mauthausen concentration camp was liberated by the US Army, they were greeted by Spanish Republicans who had been interned there. They had been handed over to the Germans by the Vichy government. Worth mentioning is the role of Spain regarding the Jews. Several thousands of Jews lived in Spain when World War II broke out. Now, there used to be more, but by the end of the 15th century, most of them were expelled. Now, 4.5 centuries later, many Jews sought refuge in Spain. Those lacking papers were turned back at the border. I read some 500 illegal crossers were deported, but many who had crossed the border illegally were not returned. Around 10,000 non-Jewish people crossed the Franco-Spanish border legally. How many Jews crossed the border altogether? It is hard to say. Different historians have different numbers, ranging from 15,000 to 35,000. Many of them were granted transit visas. They could cross Spain to another country but not stay there. Spanish diplomats in both Greece and Hungary acted on their own behalf, not on government orders, and managed to save around 8,000 Jews altogether. Historian Payne concludes, a fair conclusion would be that Spanish policy discriminated against Jews less than did that of most European countries, but there was no plan to especially favor or assist them. Now, also worth mentioning is Operation Mincemeat that took place in 1943. The Allied deception plan where they provided the Germans with fake documents making them believe there was going to be an Allied invasion in Greece, and not Sicily, the actual site of the invasion. The Allies obtained the body of a homeless man who had died because he drank rat poison, and they dressed him up as an officer of the Royal Marines containing fake documents. They made his body strand on the Spanish coast, and the Spanish authorities, they worked together with the German Abwehr. And it was believed that the Allies would not attack Sicily. However, they did. And the Germans, they had diverted troops, away from Sicily to other parts of Europe. And with success, the Allies took Sicily in the summer of 1943. As the Allies were gaining the upper hand, Spain dropped its status of non-belligerence. The British made clear they had no intentions of directing military operation against Franco. When Fascist Italy collapsed in September 1943, it made a huge impact on the Spanish leaders because they saw Fascist Italy as an example for their own state. At war's end, Mussolini opted to leave for Spain, but these plans did not come into fruition. Spain wanted to give an impression it was adhering strictly to the position of neutrality. And in April 1945, Spain broke off diplomatic relations with Japan. Defining Spain's position during World War II is hard, because Franco himself was not always clear on it. His country was militarily and economically weak, thus he had to adapt to the circumstances. If we were to try to define his position, we would have to start with Francoist Spain's links with the Axis. They explained why neutrality turned into non-belligerence when there was the hope that some benefit could be gained with minimal involvement. After 1940, Spain again rejected the possibility of joining in the conflict to avoid coming up against the same demands. It is clear that the priority of the Spanish regime was clearly not so much victory for the Axis as its own survival. The main reason, according to historian Tassel, Why Spain did not join the war on the side of the Axis was the fact that the country was poor and weak and its ruling class in disarray. Additionally, Germany was only interested in Spain's support for a short while, and Italy did not want to have a competitor in the Mediterranean. Despite the Allies not looking favorably towards Francoist Spain, they did not overthrow him after the war. The Soviets did want to do so, but the Allies were hesitant. France was in favor, the US didn't see the Franco regime as positive. Great Britain wanted to maintain the status quo concerning Gibraltar. And because of the Cold War, the focus of the Western Allies shifted more towards the Soviet Union rather than to Spain. What is true is that thousands of war criminals and former Nazis made their way to Spain. Belgian Nazi collaborator Leon Degrelle, for example, who died there in 1994 at the age of 87. Ante Pavelic, the Croatian dictator, first made his way to Argentina, later to Spain, where he passed away in 1959. And also the Croatian Vyacheslav Luburic, who ran the infamous Jasenovac death camp in World War II in Yugoslavia. He was assassinated in Spain in 1969. With Franco not joining the side of Hitler and Mussolini, at some point Hitler claimed Franco was making the biggest mistake of his life. Yet it was Franco who died in his bed at the age of 75. Mussolini was captured and killed, and Hitler, he shot himself, leaving Europe in ruins. Although some believe that Hitler got away to Argentina. What about Argentina during World War II? Click right here, and I talked about División Azul, the Blue Division, the Spaniards on the Eastern Front. Click right here. Thank you so much for watching, and adios.